So we are here at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con, and today we have with us Dee Kumar from CNCF. Dee, can you tell us a bit about what do you do at CNCF?
Sure. It's been a very humbling experience. I'm about 5 months into my role. So primarily my job is to focus on the community, its developers, contributors, our end users, as well as our members. So really understanding our audience and driving all the amazing marketing programs that we have already today, but also building on some new programs that I have in mind. Just to highlight some few programs that will be new outside of our webinars, our events, case studies, and a blog series. My focus is going to be primarily around building thought leadership, a common narrative across all the 20 amazing projects that we have under CNCF. So it just starts with Kubernetes and just having a common understanding and framework in terms of what is Kubernetes, because I'm sure you have your own way of looking at it. And when I've talked to a lot of folks in the community, it seems that it felt like we all need to have some sort of a cohesive ways of representing all these amazing projects. And the second big focus for me is what is cloud native? Where do you begin? What's the journey? How do these projects work well together?
Mm-hmm. And you said there will be a lot of blog posts and different. Who will be your target audience?
So it's primarily, as I said, developers and contributors, and I really want to acknowledge Kelsey, Sarah Novotny, as well as Sam Ramji, who I've been working with, and they do, the developers and contributors are the heart and soul of our cloud native ecosystem. So I want to make sure that we have some sophisticated tools inside of the Linux Foundation so we can really address the community and build out new programs, and just outside of email blasts and outside of some new existing programs that we have today.
So what is the difference between a contributor and a developer? I mean, are they the same?
So that's a great question. So in my mind, they are two different audiences. Developers, I think it starts off with being a user of a technology, and then you understand that technology, and then you write code. So then you become a developer, and then that code process goes through some sort of reviewing, and then the maintainers are actually who keep these projects alive, because you need to have some sort of great documentation. You need to really describe what the code, why the code was written, and what is a feature and what is a release. So I think they're completely two different audiences, but at the end of the day, it's one kind of common community. It's all about how do you use these technologies. And then the other big thing that I would like to do is also focus just not on the technology, but to elevate the technical message to being more of a business message, or understanding and helping a developer in terms of their journey in cloud native, because we all write a lot of code. I'm a developer myself, but I think it's really important to, there is a gap in terms of why that code was written, what did that feature or a release solve from a business standpoint. So I think it's been very humbling to just talk to various members in the CNCF community as well. And I think one common objective we all have aligned towards is how do you ensure that the cloud native, which is, we all talk about cloud, but what is cloud native and how does it become a part of standard business objectives? And then how do you really match the KPIs of a C-level exec to a developer? And then how do you really make that overall narrative or story cohesive?
When you mention developer and contributor, does it also mean that essentially developers are users and contributors are who actually, but do you also help those developers in their evolution or journey to become contributors?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Yes, that's the roadmap from being a user to a developer to a reviewer to a maintainer. So yes, absolutely. And eventually, I think that it's that strong ecosystem that makes this whole open source very powerful. And I think we really have to focus on what that journey looks like. And then I think it's really great that now we have 20 amazing projects under the Cloud Native Computing Foundation.
Right.
And so we have now a very strong set of programs that are built around Kubernetes, but I think our focus should be eventually on making sure all the other projects achieve maximum potential and critical mass pretty quickly. And we can start with figuring out what are certain guiding principles or criteria. Should we start focusing on Prometheus, Envoy? Is it a joint story around Kubernetes, Prometheus, Envoy? And I think that's where I want to really highlight the importance of us collectively thinking about the journey to cloud native. And eventually, I think the goal is to be a completely digitally transformed organization.
Based on the latest CNCF survey, there is a huge adoption in China and Asia. And as somebody who's trying to drive the community, so what kind of challenge do you see? Because there is language barrier, cultural barriers. So.
That's a great question, and I think you were I liked your blog post where you really talked about, the BAT, which is Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, and these companies are of course becoming the cloud native powerhouse. So in terms of challenges, I think I'll come to the cultural standpoint, but I think it's also about understanding that a lot of these container technologies today in China, and it's not limited to China, but even in the US, it's still, I would say, in the early adoption phase. We're not seeing a lot of mainstream. And what do I mean by that is the containers are still being deployed in an on-prem or in a very local environment, and it's not being fully scaled to a production environment. And the reason for that is I think there is still a lot of awareness and education that needs to happen within the community. Is once you scale large workloads to production, then you naturally have to be starting to think about security, reliability, monitoring, logging, and that really makes us all come together and understand what is the journey and what is the flow. So that's one. And I think to address the cultural and the language barrier standpoint, I think it's not just limited to China. I think this whole effort should be a global effort in terms of us, and it starts with CNCF, I think, where we can start building some underlying fabric. I like the way Dan calls it like a plumbing software, free open source environment that we can provide. And then eventually, I think the way we overcome language and cultural barriers is once that underlying fabric is given to the community, then you can start thinking about using that fabric, and it starts with messaging. And the Cloud Native Computing Foundation messaging is all about open cloud and creating a portability layer across private, public, and hybrid clouds. And then the goal eventually is to then start layering different projects. And then the third layer would be how do these projects work well together.
Right. You are here at the KubeCon, and what has been your experience? Because you joined us, this is your,
I've been 6 months into my role.
So this is kind of your second KubeCon? Or?
No, this is actually my first KubeCon. And so it's been amazing just to see how vibrant the community is. And I've been really following all the keynotes and some of the sessions. And I think there was a point that was made by David from Spotify, which I kind of resonated really well, is you have to have the guts to ask. You have to reach out to the community. It's all about, this is the place. And it was amazing to know that the stats are about 4,300 attendees. And that kind of shows the power of the community. And therefore, with my role at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, I really want to focus on tailoring marketing programs. And I think I want to call out Arun Gupta, where he kind of educated me being a marketer, because there is a gap between developers and marketers, and developers sometimes they kind of view marketing as a bunch of stuff that they can't use. So Arun Gupta actually educated me and said it's less about selling, which is how developers view marketers as, and it's more about education. And therefore I want to really emphasize the fact that there's a big difference between education and selling. And me being a developer myself, I can completely resonate with the thought that Arun made. And it's all about really creating these marketing programs in terms of not only in a way that developers can understand, but like I said, I also want to make sure that there is a common language that bridges the gap between developers as well as standard business objectives.
Yeah, often, especially in the open source world, it's marketing, and it's seen, as a, I don't know what it, there's like antagonism towards that. So it's exactly. But the good thing is that the Kubernetes community is mostly enterprise driven. So most of the developers also come from that background, so they do understand very well as compared to a lot of mostly desktop Linux communities where they don't understand the difference between that. So that's a good thing. So to the last day, what has been your key takeaway from this conference?
So my key takeaway, one, it was great to hear the roadmap of Kubernetes from Aparna. So that was really good about understanding how Google is starting to look at developer experience. So I would kind of say it's all about working in the community so we can enrich the developer experience. Two, I think I really like the talk from Sarah Wells, Financial Times, where she kind of started talking about technologies and how you need to start making certain choices. So I like the fact that companies are now thinking about the right choice and how to invest. And then three, I think the key takeaway is the whole big message that I learned from the community is it's all about cloud native, and cloud native is the journey. We all need to figure out what is that journey and how we can work towards making organizations having different challenges. Having a monolith app, where do I begin, versus I already have certain microservices, what do I do with it? And so I think it's just about really figuring out the roadmap for not just limited to Kubernetes but across other different projects as well.
Awesome. I think we talked about some of the things that are close to your heart as well as your work. Do you think you want to touch upon something else, or you covered the basic?
I think we've already touched upon. I really liked your question about what does that developer career profile look like. So I would like to say that that's something that is in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation I want to focus on is really actually, that's a great point, is thinking about developer profiles, and there are different types of profiles. Are you a developer who just writes raw code? Are you a developer who's actually using a IDE? And what are the types of languages the developers have? So I kind of want to start looking at developer profiles, segmenting that whole audience, and then starting to build marketing programs,
right,
and then bridging the gap between developers as well as making the cloud native as a standard business objective.
Awesome. Good luck with that, and of course we are here to help you all the time.
Thank you.